and I am the Associate Director of Training and Organizational Development for VOC. I do a lot of different things, wear a lot of different hats. One of those tonight will be helping to facilitate this meeting. And as part of that, I'm just going to go over kind of how we've set this up. First off, to help minimize distractions, we're going to ask everybody to keep their microphones off and their video off. We've got now, by my count, over 60 people on this meeting, so we don't want the screen getting too cluttered up with a bunch of video screens. And then as far as any questions go for this presentation, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end with an opportunity for you to put your questions into the chat box, and then we'll just take those in the order they're received. That being said, if you could hold any questions until the end, just in case your question gets answered during the course of the presentation. So yeah, we'll have a set time for Q&A. And then if you do want to hide the attendee boxes that are all covered in people's names right now, if you haven't done that already, you can right-click on any of the video boxes or the three little dots that appear in them and choose hide all non-video participants, and that'll make that happen for you. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Anne and let her get this started.
Well, hello everyone. Hopefully you can see me and you can see the screen in front of you. And we're meeting obviously under very different circumstances than any of us would have ever imagined even a month ago or a month and a half ago. And I'm delighted to have on with me Jim Bedwell. Many of you might know Jim. Jim is retired from the U.S. Forest Service, but he's also a VOC board member now. And so his perspective on kind of both from the board's perspective on kind of how we're managing this, as well as his extensive knowledge from being a land manager and what this could possibly mean also for land managers will be important. So again, thank you for sharing some time with us today, and hopefully we'll answer some questions. I don't know that we'll have all the answers, but we're certainly going to give you an organizational update at this point. So today we're going to try to cover, in we hope about 45 minutes, a couple things. An update on our field program status, so what's going on with not only our projects and training, but other things that we do related to volunteer engagement. Looking at some next steps in terms of what we may have to retool when and if we're able to undertake projects and trainings yet this year. We'll conclude a little bit at the end about ways that immediately you can get involved as we look at some of these retooling, as well as some other engagement opportunities that we have on the horizon. And then we'll leave plenty of time at the end, we hope, for your questions, and hopefully we can answer all those. So a couple things in terms of the greatest influencer that we're using right now in terms of a lot of decisions that we've had to make to date is the fact that prioritizing public health has been our most important influencer. So social distancing and staying at home has been really important. You know, our bottom line is, in our minds, there's really no beneficial risk to COVID. We can think of nothing that, you know, it gives us in our life other than a lot of inconvenience, and in some cases a great and very serious illness for those that contract it and have serious consequences as a result. Obviously, there's also nothing to be gained from getting infected. So, you know, because our projects are close with people all around them, there's pretty much no way to initially prevent that. And of course, we don't yet know the possibility of whether that increases immunity once we've been exposed. So, you know, those have been certainly important considerations as we've made decisions about our work this year. There are some additional decision-making influencers that both the staff and the board have been looking at. These of course, remain out of our control. Transmission rates in Colorado, they are still increasing. You know, the peak is anticipated in mid-May. We're looking at, you know, carefully following what the governor is saying, as well as our public health medical staff in Colorado in particular, but also at a national level. And obviously, you know, if you've heard, as I've heard in the news, you know, is there enough adequate testing to be able to diagnose all the people that should and need to be diagnosed, and the ability to isolate people with COVID-19 symptoms. And then the last area is, of course, related to lifting of at-home restrictions, which are slated perhaps to be lifted the end of this week, perhaps longer for heightened or at-risk populations. And of course, we're looking at things like, you know, you could be asymptomatic as well, and we currently don't have adequate testing for that. So the other thing that we are certainly learning about is that there will probably be continued COVID-19 disruptions. This chart on the right was pretty interesting, came out of some work that was done in the Imperial College of COVID in England, but really looking at these periodic increases, ups and downs of what might happen with the progression of COVID over time until there's a vaccine. And they're saying, you know, at least 18 to 24 months. Of course, this data varies widely, but in general, you know, at that time, 60% of the world's population might have already been developed COVID symptoms in that time. There may be continued periodic aggressive suppression, so we may still see episodic school closures again. We may be asked to social distance for extended periods of time and until there is a vaccine. We may have to return to work from home, or some of us may have to continue to work from home until it's more, there's less of a public health issue. And of course, then these reoccurrent surges that I addressed. And last being sort of this, in general, kind of an overarching social disruption that will probably be a new norm for at least the rest of this year and perhaps into 2021. And some people recently are saying that could continue into 2022. So I'm going to turn this over to Jim, and he'll walk through where we've kind of been, the actions the staff and board have taken to date. Jim? Oh, you're muted.
Thanks, Ann. Hope everyone's healthy and safe out there. You know, since this began, I would say VOC has been very, very proactive in engaging and responding and looking ahead, not just responding to what's happening. The first COVID-19 case in Colorado was identified March 5th. A week later, the VOC staff began working from home following the governor's state of emergency order. As the VOC board, we work very closely with Ann and the executive staff, the leadership team, on financial matters and long-term strategies. Since the COVID-19 crisis has emerged, we've worked very closely with them to keep apprised of the impacts on programs and financial health. For example, the executive committee went to bi-weekly meetings in mid-March just to stay in touch, stay informed, and provide advice to Ann and her team. One of the primary responsibility of a board of directors for a nonprofit is ensuring the long-term sustainability of the organization. So that's how we've been approaching that. In addition to short-term safety of our volunteers and partners, we are concerned with the long-term sustainability of the organization. In 2020, VOC's budget was slated to be about $1.4 million. Much of that is raised in the year that it's spent, and project work is a big portion of that. That is funded by the land management partners, and they're depending on the important work you do and the thousands of volunteers that VOC brings in and you help coordinate every year. So if the work can't get done, then that starts to threaten funding and in various ways that we'll touch on shortly. But VOC began canceling projects first in March and April, and then monitoring the situation later in May and June as we looked ahead to many of the management challenges. And with funding falling off from canceled projects and other funding sources, have had to make significant budget reductions. In addition to the concerns for employees, project leaders, and volunteers, we're very cognizant also of the limited medical capacity and vulnerability of the mountain communities and the land management agencies that we partner with, hospitals, search and rescue, and their own staffs and their challenges. So that really affected those projects, and about 70% of the expenses of VOC are in personnel and benefit costs. So any cuts cut deeply. VOC very quickly responded to the congressional package and received a loan through the payroll protection program to help bridge some of the gaps, but it only covers about 8 weeks of expenses. So on April 16th, the board and the leadership team just last Thursday made the difficult choices to further reduce spending by approving a temporary furlough of program and administrative support staff. Tough decision, but it had to be done for that long-term sustainability. Okay, Ann, next slide. So VOC staff's been communicating closely with the land management partners to determine what restrictions they have, how and when we can resume project work and their own funding situations. Again, as I said before, they have their own challenges and staff and protecting them and gearing up for the season and getting PPE and the like. Some partners, such as the Forest Service and BLM, can and have agreed to extend contract agreement deadlines for VOC so work can be done at a later date. They recognize the shared stewardship model that they've built, i.e. dependent on volunteers and for-profit partners and the like to help sustain their organizations and get the work done on the ground. So it's in their best interest to help sustain the capacity of organizations like VOC. In addition to that, the National Forest Foundation, which annually grants upwards of $100,000 for projects that VOC does on National Forest System lands, has extended its project completion deadline to November of 2021. So that gives VOC the possibility of rescheduling projects and maintaining the funding later this year or into next year. However, everybody's not in that situation as the federal agencies and their major partners like National Forest Foundation. Partners like Colorado Parks and Wildlife and Denver Mountain Parks have faced significant budget reductions, are going through their own personnel situations, but there's lack of tax revenues, and they've had canceled projects. They may not be able to fund some of those this year. They're cutting back themselves, and it may indeed even affect funding into 2021. So whether these projects can be done in the near future at all is certainly affecting how we can move forward in the coming months. It's been tough. Back to you, Ann.
Okay. So we had to make a very, very difficult decisions, as Jim mentioned, at the board meeting last Thursday. We had already done significant expense reductions in terms of contractors that have been working with us. Other expenses, like we've laid up all the vehicles, so we're not paying insurance on them right now. We're not undertaking new initiatives this year in terms of additional development of stepping up stewardship toolkits and guides that had been slated. And so the next possible thing that we had to do to really look at reducing our costs in the short term was to temporarily furlough staff. And I know for me, Friday was probably one of the most difficult days I've ever had in my career in nonprofit management. I don't think I've ever been through a situation as challenging as COVID-19 in terms of organizational well-being and sustainability. And anytime it touches people, it makes it just very, very painful. Many of these folks you have worked with, Kelly and Kate last year, who are on the ground folks. Kendall is our new volunteer and outreach coordinator. She came on just a few months ago. Amy, who many of you know, has been our admin person and also now works in some resource development in terms of events. And then Taylor, who moved out of our youth program management position into a resource development manager just a few months ago in a promotion. Her furlough will begin effective May 15th based on some agreements and grants that we need to get in. Now what this represents is a short-term temporary way, because we're not operating projects in the foreseeable next several months. This was a way for us to reduce expenses. It also means, however, that there are several of us within the Denver office that we're retaining 5 people in the Denver office. Myself, Kelly Flowers, who deals with communications, Sarah, who deals with our oversight, financial oversight and contract management, Dan, who you know well, and then Anna Savisha. Just as you might recall, Dean Winstanley, who was on our team for many years, 7 years, had already made a decision to retire, not quite retire, but move into other things that he wanted to do, including getting his knees replaced and traveling and looking at other options for himself. And of course, all of those are on hold for him, but he left in early April. Unfortunately, we had actually interviewed a replacement that was sort of going to be kind of Dan Williams's equivalent, but on the statewide stewardship side. We had to put in a hiring freeze, and there were actually 3 positions that did not get hired under that freeze. That replacement for Dean, an associate director of statewide stewardship, a replacement for the work that Taylor had been doing with youth, so a community program coordinator who would work with our youth program, including Karen, and other youth-related work that we do in the community. That position has also been frozen for unforeseeable future. And then also Alex Williams, who many of you knew as a seasonal project manager. We also were unable to bring him on. So in the course of the furloughs that we just did on Thursday and Friday of last week, and those 3 freezes, we have reduced our staff by over 50%. Those of us that remain in the Denver office will pick up a lot of the work that they've done as we begin to look at retooling for the season and how that might work, and fundraising and doing the best we can to kind of be able to bring them back as soon as we can for the furloughed staff. We have 2 partnership offices who staff who are being retained, Sally Weir in the San Luis Valley and Beth Ray in Weld County. Their positions are done on a different funding structure and are still able to be contracted, Sally with the Forest Service and Beth with resources that we secured through the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. So we will rely on them to do some of the work that we are going to be proposing in terms of some online training and virtual trainings in iNaturalist and other citizen science efforts. Whoops, let me go back here. And then Beth will also be working on the development of 6 stewardship webinars for volunteers in Weld County, but those may also be applicable to other types of volunteer engagement as we go forward in the next several months. And with that, I'm going to turn over the next piece to Dan and give him the remote. Okay, there you go, Dan.
Sure. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk about kind of how we're retooling projects and programs a little bit here. I do want to preface this all by saying, though, we definitely spent a lot of the last many weeks considering what this might need to look like and sort of planning for the likely outcomes for how VOC can become operational again as soon as possible. We really don't know for sure how things will progress and where this will all be headed. So none of this is necessarily set in stone and finalized, and unfortunately neither is any time frame for when we think we might be able to become operational. Right now we're looking at programs canceled through June, and a big part of that is allowing the organization time to plan appropriately to become operational, but at the same time it's another thing we'll have to take as it comes. And you can go ahead and forward this. I'm having trouble with the screen control. So a couple things. First, right now, due to the additional logistical complexities in terms of sanitation and other transmission issues, we're looking at single day only, so no overnight camping projects, and anything we do in 2020 would have to be achievable by volunteers who can drive up, attend, and go home at the end of the day. We're looking at group size restrictions and age restrictions, and so limiting any project to no more than 20 people and retooling the project delivery model to still be effective with work outcomes within that size. So, potentially taking one project that was a larger project and turning it into a longer term project with smaller groups. And then we are currently looking at suspending essentially all of our youth programs for the duration of this crisis. So 18 years and older only would be allowed to attend VOC programs. In addition, we'll be putting out a lot of information about kind of questions to ask yourself if you are a part of a high-risk age group or other type of high-risk population, whether or not it's in your best interest to attend a VOC project. We're going to eliminate carpooling for the duration, so only household members traveling together. That's, of course, been a really great thing we have been able to put together in the past that we don't feel are able to do currently. And as we look at smaller project sizes, we're also looking at not only eliminating opportunities for transmission, but also, I think, quite honestly, a budget savings at this point, while to not be renting box trucks from Enterprise and to be bringing all the tools and equipment needed in the VOC pickup trucks. At the same time, as we look at all the as we analyze all the opportunities that are available to us, one of the things we're pretty sure we're going to have to do as we react to set standards given by the CDC, other state organizations, that so on and so forth, our project work is going to have to allow for appropriate physical distancing. So just as a good example of what that means is we'll have to be doing things that currently would allow for people to stay at least 6 feet apart from each other. And as many of you can imagine, 4 people humping a big rock over to some structure is not within that appropriate physical distance. So that's a good example of some projects we may not be able to do while we have these physical distance limits in place. And one idea that's been discussed, or one thought that's been discussed, some projects, including Basic Trail, may need to be listed as experienced volunteers only, where even if we are doing something that can maintain physical distance, it may be the case where it's difficult to explain to someone who doesn't know how to do that while maintaining physical distance. So we'll just be analyzing some of these projects going forward on that basis, where we might be able to get it done if we recruit people that already know what they're doing. So we're going to be putting in some virtual project orientation methods to limit the amount of time we have to spend. Well, for two things. One, to limit the amount of time we have to spend potentially in close proximity doing the typical types of on-site orientation that we do, getting people to understand kind of why we're here, what we're up to on the project. But at the same time, a bunch of our policies are going to have to be updated around what volunteers need to do to come prepared. We're going to be looking at, how we can disinfect tools and all these other sorts of things. So Anne's listed some of these. So volunteers providing their own PPE, including masks, gloves, food, and then we're going to be eliminating food service for the foreseeable future. So volunteers will have to bring all of their own food, snacks, water, all of that stuff. So all of these things are going to require an updated orientation and a bunch of updated stuff for volunteers to review before they attend a project. And so that will require some virtual project orientation, either through live sessions similar to the one you're attending right now, or through some recorded content or stuff that volunteers have to read before they show up. And then we're looking at what we can do for use of non-invasive health check procedures, most likely temperature guns as a way to screen people as they arrive to projects. Also paperwork for personal health risk assessments and other attestaments to an individual's health before they show up on projects, and revise waivers. And then new tool disinfection procedures. So I did want to wait until this slide popped up. If we do become operational under this basis, just because we're not bringing out tool trucks or serving food, doesn't mean, I think, that volunteers who are typically volunteering in a project support role, like a tool manager or a crew chef, can't still participate. I think it's going to likely still be a large operation to set up our disinfecting stuff and keep tools disinfected and all that sort of stuff as we move forward. So I hope, folks that have volunteered in a certain way that may not be feasible in 2020 into 2021 will still consider helping out in this way on projects if they are able and so inclined. And then currently I'm doing a lot of work on retooling OSI training. Short of it right now, I know a lot of you have received emails from me with the cancellation of the in-person field sessions, but as you know, we've done a lot of work in the last 2 to 3 years to put training tools online, and are currently, for many of our trainings, requiring online stuff to be looked at and completed before trainings attend anyway. So currently, a lot of you have been given the option to maintain your enrollment in the online work and do that. But as we become operational, we do feel that training has the potential to become, given its smaller group size and better suitability to appropriate physical distance, has the opportunity to potentially happen sooner than projects. And so what we're going to prioritize is bringing on new leaders and anything else that we feel can be done with appropriate physical distance. So that is, crew leader training, crew leader instructor training. As many of you know, we were going to implement a new saw program this year that included chainsaw training, crosscut training, trail design, and then some of the other trainings that we were set to do this year that we think can be done remotely will all start to pop back up on the calendar as soon as possible with the opportunity to register. And with that, as many of you know, our training program is fee-based. At the very least, now that we've had some time to figure out what it can look like, we're going to be heavily discounting these things for incentivizing participation, even more so than we have in the past, to get VOC folks into these trainings, and just kind of keep an eye out for what those incentives are. It'll likely include some free training as well. So if you have any questions about what that looks like, I can either try to address them tonight in the Q&A, or you can send me an email.
Well, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Jim. So just to kind of recap where we're headed over the next several months, as you heard, we had the unfortunate experience of having to furlough some of the field program and support staff. And then that occurred. They are on board until next Friday and doing some good work until then with us. And we encourage you to reach out to any of those folks as you wish. Furloughed staff, they still maintain health benefits and are able to be reinstated relatively soon. We're just not sure how long that's going to last, but so initially they'll be furloughed until we figure out whether and when we can get our field program back up. We really are looking at this process of retooling and recalibrating our field program delivery options so that we can do some work between July and October. As both Jim has said and Dan has said, that's dependent on many things, much of which may be out of our control, which is what land managers are needing and can manage, whether there is money for certain projects, and also whether we can get all of the things in place that we need to be able to do to be able to offer those programs in a safe public health fashion. And just to reiterate, you know, these are difficult times, but we do hope that once we can get back up and running with projects, even if they're smaller, that community of VOC will really be what sustains us for sure. In the meantime, we do hope to host some online volunteer community engagement opportunities and things that can kind of keep our community active and a part of one another, and VOC is happy to host those through our Zoom video conferencing and various, you know, like an after, 4 o'clock beer thing and whatever. So we're working on some of those things. We are aggressively doing fundraising. We have been working with foundations and private donors to really convert any monies that might have been restricted for projects into general operating support that enables us some flexibility to do a lot of this retooling. We're working with our land managers, for example, who have contract agreements with us to allocate a portion of those contracts to also enable us to do this retooling. So that is a big focus of mine in the next couple months, is to secure revenue. And then our board meets July 16th. And at that point, we'll have another update, significant update. The executive committee, which operates between board meetings, meets regularly, as does our finance committee. So if there's anything that happens that needs addressing earlier, those two committees are able to act on behalf of the board. So we're almost concluding here, but just wanted to, before we close, give some ways that we've thought about folks like you that might be twiddling. I don't know if you're twiddling your thumbs, but if you really want to get involved, we could use it. And so we thought of some ways to think about that. One is we are really working to put some on-project sanitation and disinfection protocols and equipment in place. This little picture here is a handy dandy kind of hands-free hand washing station that allows for a variety of ways of keeping things sanitized on a project, kind of coming up with tool disinfection and how we might be able to do that at the warehouse or the ops center. We have, well, here are some ideas. There you go. There are mine. Some waste management systems. The other is we are looking at creating cloth face masks. Typically, we would want volunteers to bring their own, but if somebody shows up without one, do we have supplies in place for that? Or face masks that would qualify us to do some of that closer work. For example, crosscut saw training, we feel like we can physically distance there, but we probably would require those that are being trained or those operating the saws to wear an N95 mask. So looking at ways that we can create that or get those masks for us. We are looking at programs like the virtual stewardship opportunities, such as iNaturalists, and if folks know of people or want to help us with any of those would be great opportunities for us. And then obviously these community building efforts, if you want to host some kind of a community building Zoom or virtual connection, we'd love to have your ideas there. Down at the bottom of this, any of us on the team, you can email and we'd be happy to entertain your thoughts. So, whoops, a few more things. Oh, and the sharing of cruise chef recipes, which is one idea a lot of us have had because we really want a lot of those great recipes that Barb and Rose and everybody else, Susan, all do for us. So, all right. I think my next slide here, sorry, I'm a little challenged, is time for you. So I know you've probably got some things in the chat room, and Dan is going to throw some of those questions out to Jim or myself, I believe. And
Yeah, I'm just going to start with kind of the order that I've received them, and we're going to go till at least 5:30. We think we can commit to staying on that long. We're just going to see how it goes, how many questions we get. But in any case, I'm going to jump right in. One question being, Anne, from volunteers, any recommendations on supporting furloughed staff?
in terms of, well, I'm not, well,
Just
first
what
of
can we
all,
do to help support furloughed staff?
well, I think it's a very challenging time for them. As you know, over the next week, you can reach them at their VOC emails, and we are encouraging them also to share their private emails with those of you that reach out. Furloughed staff, as I mentioned, do retain all their health benefits. They are also able to secure unemployment benefits. And currently under this particular stimulus package, they're also able to get a $600 per week additional allocation out of unemployment. That with that, we hope that their financial situations are at least not compromised too much. Of course, the emotional situation is always one that's very hard. It's very hard for all of us that are losing them right now. Again, we hope to bring them back. So I would reach out to them personally. Our objective is to bring them back once we can figure out the next iteration of our project season and when that might happen.
So this one might get a little bit at what we are kind of thinking about in terms of how we're able to get things going. The question is, since testing is not sensitive and likely serology tests that will be available later this year are also not sensitive, how can we screen people for immunity?
Well, we can. I mean, I think first and foremost, we're not an organization. We're not a medical organization. We're not a science-based organization. We're a volunteer organization. And so I think this is the challenge that's in front of us, is this is a very, very serious challenge. This is not a virus to be played with. And so I think there will be things that we can probably do. We've been talking, for example, with the United States Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management, who are putting in protocols and procedures for their own seasonal staff. But these are very challenging protocols that they're facing as well. In a conference call I was on last week, their seasonal staff now must show up in separate vehicles, not share tools, have to be distanced more than, in some cases, 20 up to 50 feet, depending on the work they're doing. And so you can imagine just trying to figure out how we create an environment that's safe. And I think some of the challenges that we've heard about is, you know, you're just not going to be able to do that. People are going to have to fill out, if we do run projects, people are going to have to self-disclose that they've either had COVID or not. You know, people that show up when there are people who have not had COVID, they make the personal decision about whether they're there or not. Our waivers have to be modified to show personal responsibility, and the project will get shut down if procedures are not followed. So we just have to really look at that carefully, and that's what we're trying to do over the next several months. And we don't really have all the answers on that. I know Jim might have something to add to this. Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Ann. I think you covered it very well. I would just sum it up as, you know, there's a lot of risk assessment going on. The hosting agencies will be assessing risk, whether they think they can safely host the project and, you know, provide whatever staffing they do. if it's allowed within their own safety protocols. VOC will have to assess that. Is this the type of project that we believe can be safely conducted, given all the unknowns and the like, and build some of the instruments that Ann is talking about. And individuals themselves have to do their own risk assessment too. Can they, are they comfortable? Can they feel like they can protect themselves and carry out the behaviors that are required? So someone told me recently, I'm tired of people saying this is unprecedented. And it's like, well, my mother's 97. She told me the other day, I've never seen anything like this, so she wasn't around when the Spanish flu was there in 1918. So we're all assessing the current situation, and as some of the things develop, but and everyone's doing their own risk assessment at their own level.
Yeah, one last comment on that. In other conversations we've had nationally with various groups that are also challenged by this, one of the concerns that will manifest itself in Colorado is that there are certain areas of the state, rural areas in particular, and mountain communities that may restrict intrastate transportation. So they may not want anybody from Denver coming into their communities to do work. And so we may be limited in that respect as well for the safety of those with whom the area that we are volunteering in are exposed to this as well. So all these are very difficult things to figure out, and happy to, if people have ideas, send them along, because that would be very helpful to hear what you might be hearing as well.
So we have a question that might be best for Anna to answer. Is there any chance that the website can be updated to allow members to pay their dues directly through this site? And I assume that's membership dues, instead of waiting for a mailer. There's only a one-time donation link. Also, can the membership payment allow for extra donation above whatever the membership level is?
Sure, I can address that. So you can actually make a donation on the VOC website today. And you can do it as a recurring donation. You can put in any amount that you'd like to do over the membership level. So that feature is already available. And if you have any trouble, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm happy to walk you through it.
Thanks. Let's see. So I think this may be kind of lumped into with kind of a little bit more about VOC's decision on program postponement, but the specific question is regarding the gardening projects that were scheduled in May. Can those be done with few staff, since they do not require any technical work and can allow for social distancing? Ann, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So most of the cancellations that have occurred to date are based on the fact that there's a statewide stay-at-home restriction. So no matter what, nobody should be out and nobody should be doing anything that other than sheltering in place. And so that has been a huge determinant for us. When those restrictions are lifted, then we can look at projects. And I think part of it is also, again, the project partner that we're working at and whether that's something safe that we can do. We do not have in place yet any of the protocols around disinfection of tools, ensuring their safety when people are on the site. I don't know if you're like me, but in my neighborhood, I think sometimes it's hard to see that people are actually socially distancing. So I think people just honestly don't know quite what that means and what that sometimes can entail. And so we just had to be very careful under the stay-at-home restrictions that we were in fact staying at home. The reason we've canceled through June is many of those projects in June were also ones that were bigger than we could do or required overnight or some of these limitations. And so we've had to kind of make those. And we were also encouraged actually with the stay-at-home orders going through April 26th. The governor announced at that time that the peak in Colorado was still going to be about mid-May. And so we felt like the risk was too high to do projects in May that moved us into making decisions in June that had to be made. So I think that's a long answer. The short answer is all projects are able to be looked at from the perspective of can they be done. But right now we are just hamstrung with being able to pull it all together with the necessary public health safety protocols that we need to have in place for us to feel safe to do this.
So I have a question on making masks. The question is, I assume these are cloth masks and not N95 masks. I think I can go ahead and take this. Yes, those would be cloth masks. The further question is, how many would you estimate we would need for a weekend of projects? Right now, I unfortunately have no idea. So I would say if you know someone who sews or you want to make cloth masks, we'll take as many can be made to be donated for future use.
Yeah. And I'll just quickly answer. We do have at the Ops Center about 40 N95 masks that we've had through the years. Those are the new ones. There were a few used ones which we would not actually be able to use at this point since they were used. I think in the past those have been used as dust and other kinds of, but the particulate levels that are now required in an N95 would be those, but the cloth mask could just be for general use, and they would have to be sanitized and probably given away. So the person that comes and takes it that day would take it home. We would not try to sanitize those ourselves. So they would have to be a donated item. We wouldn't collect them back. So it could mean quite a few that we'd have to go through if people didn't have them.
All right, question for clarification. Are overnight projects definitely canceled for the entire season, or are late summer camping projects just on hold for now?
Well, currently, we are proposing that all overnight camping projects be postponed or changed or reconfigured for another time. There is still a lot to be determined about sanitation with this particular virus, and this virus can be transmitted through fecal matter. If we had a Sanilet, it would have to be disinfected every time. That may still be the case on a weekday project as well. Our ability to prevent social or prevent physical distancing with where tents are located and water supplies and water sources, it's an overwhelming thing. And as disappointed as people are, we are really taking a very conservative approach here. We are in the business of not losing any lives. And we would just worry because we don't have the necessary testing and we cannot necessarily know that people are immune unless that becomes an opportunity. So it could mean down the road if there's an effective immunity test and you can have a crew that's completely immune, that may be an opportunity to open up a camping project again and other types of projects. But right now we don't know that there's a good avenue for the parameters of public health safety that we think we need to follow.
Okay, sorry, just sorting through this. So I think a couple other remaining here are just kind of some comment and consideration on a couple of the policies we may yet put in place. So it may just be something we definitely take an advisement, but also might be an opportunity to just address how we're looking at doing that. One being, could box lunches be provided if they were purchased from a restaurant or cafe? The other being, other volunteer gigs are putting a hard rule for anyone over 60 to stay at home. Is there any consideration being given for this guidance by VOC? So kind of two things there, but kind of overall, potentially how we're doing our policy making process.
Sure, and all those ideas that we had in terms of retooling projects are still obviously in flux, as they may be, depending on restrictions, etc. The reason we said no food on projects is that really food that would have been prepared by cruise chefs and it would have had to be scrutinized for all the public health standards that we would need to do. Obviously, getting support from a restaurant or something like that to provide those box lunches could be an option for us. And so obviously we can certainly look at that. So none of these are what I would call policies set in stone. They're certainly things that we're trying to work on right now. In terms of the at-risk population, I will tell you personally, I'm at the at-risk population. I know that if I get COVID, I will get at the very worst of anything. I just, I don't actually know that for a fact, but that's what I think about. And so you will not find me on a project, or you will not find me hanging out in a grocery store any longer than I need to hang out there. And I would suspect that, we will lose and we will have challenges in recruiting volunteers in general who share the same kind of trepidation as many of us do around putting ourselves at risk. And so I think it ends up being a personal choice that people make. I see plenty of people that are well beyond my age in years that are walking around without masks in grocery stores and, all sorts of things. So I'm not going to try to judge whether that's something that would work or not. But I do feel like we will follow the guidance of the state and we will follow the guidance of the CDC. And when they say that at-risk populations should probably not be exercising public exposure much, then I think that would be something we would certainly put into our project agreements or project announcements to say if you're a part of an at-risk or highly at-risk, heightened risk population, that participation on a project would be discouraged.
And I'll say before I move on to a question that Allison just submitted, I have seen a couple come privately through me just for clarification. Yes, we are currently canceling the entire calendar through the end of June. And I would also add, I think I meant to say it during my piece, but whatever projects become and trainings become operational down the road, I would not expect them to just be, we'll just jump right into what we already had scheduled. It's going to be a much different landscape of opportunities that will be out there for people to potentially participate in if we're able to become operational again in 2020.
Just to add to that, Dan, I think we would be doing a call out again, like if you've been on a project team or you're thinking about working, towards a project team that's working on a project right now, it's probably, we're going to have to see whether those projects can happen. There are certain, as Jim mentioned in his presentation, both Colorado State Parks and Denver Mountain Parks are under severe budgetary considerations and reductions. And so some of the work that we might have done for them, they have actually canceled because they won't have the money to do it after June. And so, we know that there may just be some projects that won't happen, not because we can't do them necessarily at a reduced or a different retooled configuration. It's because the land manager will not be able to support them either. So we're just going to have to, once we figure out whether we can get operational on this, then we'll have to figure out whether we can, which projects we can do in the remaining time that we might have this year, if we can do them.
Okay, so the next question, and this includes maybe Anna as well. Can anyone speak a bit to the importance of messaging around increased importance of outdoor stewardship in these times, i.e. 7-day-a-week trail usage, widening trail treads in response to social distancing, closure of bathrooms and sanitation facilities, and how this group can help?
So I don't know if Anna's muted off of there. Yes, I think that's a huge concern for us, and we are trying to put out messaging in a variety of different ways around that. What we have heard is that some of our trails closest to Denver metropolitan areas in particular, or urban centers in particular, are seeing a 200% increase. And I think we are looking at ways that we can message this using other partners such as Leave No Trace that has had some really good information, as well as working with land management partners who are putting that messaging out. We have a very long and comprehensive messaging document that covers a lot of the things that we would like to do in terms of putting out messages on social media, messages that will be on our website around good stewardship in these times. And even though we can't be out there, how can we be good stewards when we are out there? And so I don't know if Anna's unmuted at this point, but there she is. If you have anything to add, Anna.
Sure. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing right now is that during the shelter in place, we really are strongly suggesting through our messaging that people try to stay close to home. I just saw some news articles today about Jeffco actually closing trails this past Sunday because there was so many people on those trails, and you just cannot maintain at least 6 feet of social distancing on some of these single track trails without traipsing all over fragile vegetation, widening the trail. So if at all possible for people to walk within their neighborhoods or run or whatever it is that they want to do, that's what we're encouraging. Once some of the restrictions are lifted, you know, what we really want to do is make sure that everyone is aware of, and Alex, Alma, thank you, because I know that you just sent an email today that Cotrex, the app, is actually tracking what trails are open and what are some of those restrictions. So for those of you on this call, if you don't have that app downloaded, it's a great one. And then, you know, as always, I think just paying attention to what's happening. I'm seeing a lot of masks and gloves that are now trash on, you know, public right of way. We're not encouraging people right now to pick up trash, but if you feel like you have the equipment to do it safely, whether you're on a trail or in your neighborhood, then we do encourage that, just a personal choice. And anything else that, you know, will just help these resources not get loved to death. We all are seeking nature as a way to cope with this, but I think we need to know that, you know, nature just can't sometimes take all of us humans at one time.
Jim, go ahead.
I think this is going to be one of the ongoing issues that we collectively here in the outdoor stewardship community will face. And I appreciate your asking it and your interest in helping. That's something we're going to have to work on. I was talking to the regional director, Rocky Mountain Region of the Forest Service of Recreation the other day, and they were saying, you know, they have their own challenges. A lot of their seasonals may not show up. They don't have a place that they can house them, or they're doing their own risk assessment and saying, I don't want to stay in that barracks with people. And there's a lot of challenges. You know, people are going to go out. They are going out. And as the snow line goes up, more people are going to go out on the trails and in the hinterlands and test the capacity of those rural communities, but also just the wear and tear and trash and waste and everything that happens on trails. So this is something I think that we're going to need to continue to focus on. One of the members of our communications committees for VOC works for Channel 7, and they were developing a series of messages around, you know, to get out to people. Maybe we need to recraft some of those. So we're all going to be challenged in this way, and we'll look for continuing ways we can use our network. But it is going to be an issue out there in the wildlands.
Well, I didn't see any other questions. I did see a comment that might be where, oh, here, one just popped in. I did see a comment that came through noting, and I just saw this as well, that the stay-at-home order will be updated on Sunday by the governor to a different, it looks like it's going to be a strong stay-at-home suggestion with some additional businesses being allowed to reopen. But I thought that might be an opportunity to just kind of, again, address overall kind of what we're looking at that's going to affect how and when we can resume operations and why we're trying to do it in a careful and conservative fashion.
Is that a question?
That was just me trying to respond to that comment.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to be, as Jim's 97-year-old mother stated, as other people are stating, as my 95-year-old mother has stated, as I'm stating, none of us have ever experienced this before. And I think the desire to become, to have our lives feel normal again, whatever that looks like and whatever that feels like, is so highly desirable. But it comes at a cost that I think is just not worth it in some regards. And so from our perspective at VOC, yes, stewardship is really important. Yes, getting our volunteers back out there is really important, but it's going to take us a while to do that. And I think we just have to do it within a time frame and within certain standards of public health in compliance with sanitation and disinfection and ability to kind of mobilize in this new way. And it's just going to take us some time. And I think we're guided in part. We're not an essential service, despite the fact that we would like to think we are. We're not an essential service. And so, getting volunteers out there immediately may not be what we're going to do until for a few more months. But once we do it, if we can do it, we will in the safest possible way. I think, Jim, were you going to add a comment to that? Okay. All right.
I think this segues into, I think what'll be, go ahead and be our last question, and then we'll wrap up. But basically any idea when a revised calendar might be available? And I think the unfortunate answer is I don't think we can put a time on that. We'll as soon as possible, but we don't know when that is.
Right. So what we are, I can address this really, from a high level. The staff over the next several weeks is developing a number of different scenarios. For example, we already know that there are some restrictions based on who the land manager is. Like I mentioned, Denver Mountain Parks and Colorado Parks and Wildlife that may not be able to do certain projects. So we'll start culling those and looking at those. We have some agreements with the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management that allow us to retool some of the methodology. And so they're less concerned about us getting right out there and doing the work as much as coming back with good methodology for doing it. And they would like us to focus on that over the next couple months and allow us to use some of their contract to do that. And so I think you're going to see, depending on how things shake out in the next month or so within the Denver itself, but in the state of Colorado and then nationally with the whole progression of the virus, some accommodations related to that, and then specifically what we think we can do based on working with land managers and the protocols. Again, I would just open it up if people are interested, and I know there's some of you on this call that might have had experience in previous lives with, hazardous waste materials or how to, really think of these processes and how we might do them to encourage you to, if you're interested in working on that with us, we can put some small work groups together and do that virtually and online and have discussion groups around it. So please feel free to reach out to me or Dan or Anna, or currently to our program team staff, Kelly and Kate, with any ideas, and then we'll use you and employ you in that regard in new volunteer ways over the next several weeks. But rest assured, we miss you. We miss all of you. We miss our season. We miss the joy we get from this community by being together. And these are tough times. I think that's also the time when we'll rise up and we'll be together again. It will take us some time to do that. We're certainly thinking about all of you. And I know we miss each other on the staff. We miss you. We miss family members, ourselves. So stay healthy and strong. Thank you so much for participating and for being concerned and caring. Reach out to our staff that we have to furlough for a few weeks, and be sure you give them your thoughts of concern and kindness and love. I know they will appreciate that. And again, stay strong and healthy. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Dan. And all of you have a safe a safe and healthy night and days ahead. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, everybody. Looking forward to when I get to see everybody finally. So hang in there, and I'll echo what Ann said. Reach out to me if you're interested in assisting with policy and procedure development. I'll be happy to talk to you about it. That's it. I'm going to go ahead and shut her down. Good to see everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.